241, the final trial. Hogwarts had entered its annual final exam week, the most tense, solemn stretch of the year. The usual bustle in the ancient corridors had been replaced by hurried footsteps and the low murmur of incantations and potion formulas. The castle smelled of parchment, old ink, and a shared, nervous tension. It felt as if every stone was holding its breath. For Harry, Ron, and Hermione, though, the usual exam anxiety had been overtaken by a colder weight. The failure at the gaunt old house was an invisible thorn in their hearts, and the letter from Hermione's parents had rubbed salt into the wound. Every line in that letter sounded like a chain. The Ministry's new Wizarding World Purity and Security Act threatened to reach into the Muggle world and purge those who were newly discovered as magic. They sat in a suffocating silence that was the quiet before a storm. Their minds weren't on O'Duels anymore, but on how to contend with the huge net the Ministry was casting. The Defense Against the Dark Arts practical final was the height of exam week. For most students, the hardest challenge. For them, maybe the only place they could legitimately vent their pressure and anger. Professor Remus Lupin was the examiner again this year. He transformed a large, empty classroom into a cramped, simulated battlefield with stone pillars and shallow pools. The task was simple. Students would enter alone and deal with a series of dark arts creatures or magical phenomena he summoned. The ordinary students' performances were awkward and revealing. A Ravenclaw high achiever, when confronted by an agile redcap, choked on nerves and misfired. Intending Expelliarmus, he cried Wingardium Leviosa. The redcap's blood-stained hat bobbed, then lunged more viciously at his face. The boy squealed and dashed out of the room, drawing stifled laughter. A Hufflepuff facing several slimy Grindylows from a deep water tank cast uncertain spells that barely disturbed the creatures. The tiny sprays of water seemed only to tickle them. When the Grindylows clawed for her ankles, Lupin saved her at the last second with a sticking charm. She finished the exam in tears. Then it was Ron's turn. He walked into the room and took a steady breath. Lupin set the examination in motion, and with a metallic screech, 5 ferocious goblin-like creatures brandishing rusty weapons crawled from cracks in the floor, their greedy, bloodshot eyes fixed on the red-haired boy. In other times, Ron might have panicked and sought cover. Now, his gaze was calm and assessing. He didn't retreat or immediately raise his wand. Jason's training echoed in his mind. Control the battlefield before you attack. He lowered his center of gravity and slammed his right foot into the floor. Earth Spike Barrage, he barked. A row of thick, jagged stone spikes erupted from the ground along the goblin's charge, but not in a neat line. They rose in a staggered, irregular array that shattered the creature's formation. One charging goblin was thrown over by a spike and howled as it skidded to a stop. Before they could regroup, Ron pushed his left hand forward and made a vague, grasping motion. Gravity spell! The goblins, split by the spikes, suddenly felt unbearably heavy, as if an invisible weight bore down on them. Their movements slackened, their arms grew leaden, they were stuck where they stood, live targets. Surprise flickered in Lupin's eyes. This wasn't a nervous examinee, but a practiced battle wizard clearing minions. Ron's tactical calm and precise spell work were beyond Obuel level, more raw, primal, and direct than standard classroom magic. Hermione's opponents were 3 phantom hippogriffs made of shimmering energy. They circled and dove, wings beating and beaks glinting. She did not attack. The worry and anger that had been consuming her became a hard, rational focus. Her parents were still practicing Starfall rhythm and could become the next Daniel at any moment. She needed power, and more importantly, control over that power. She waved her wand like a conductor guiding an orchestra. Hurricane spell. 3 controlled currents of air, precise as trained hounds, laced around the phantoms and herded their flight paths so their attacks missed. Then Hermione tapped the floor with her wand. Freezing spell. A sheet of mirror-smooth ice materialized in a corner. The phantom hippogriffs, guided there by the winds, slipped as they landed, their heavy bodies spun clumsily like tops. The whole sequence moved with effortless grace, no bloodshed, only containment. Hermione had resolved the encounter in the most efficient, least harmful way possible. Lupin watched as if seeing the first shape of a tactical master. Finally, it was Harry's turn. He entered with the feel of a drawn sword, every step measured, his green eyes hard with a quiet heat. Lupin opened a triple-locked box and released a boggart. The smoke-like creature writhed in the air, and everyone watching leaned forward, expecting it to become a dementor. It didn't. The boggart unfolded into a scene that was 100 times worse. White-haired Jason lay in a pool of cold blood. His eyes, which always held quiet wisdom and strength, were dull. A great hole in his chest swallowed all light. Hermione and Ron knelt beside him, calling his name in despair. The room and the corridor outside fell into deathly stillness. This was Harry's deepest fear. Not Voldemort, not his own death, but helplessness. Unable to protect his leader, unable to save his friends, while everything he cared for collapsed. Lupin's heart ached. He started forward as if to intervene, but Harry did not call for a Patronus. He didn't fumble for chocolate. Sweets could not heal the fire burning in him. He inhaled once, and his green eyes sparked with a cold, electric light. Facing his worst fear didn't break him. It sharpened his will and condensed his magic to an unprecedented focus. He raised his right hand, extended his index finger, not his wand, and spoke a single word in a low voice, each syllable packed with fury and resolve. Lightning. Boom. A thick, dazzling bolt of silvery white lightning ripped through the classroom, born from his fingertip with raw, elemental force. It wasn't a named spell so much as a command to the elements, the materialized will of a warrior. The bolt struck the boggart's illusion with absolute precision. There was no comedic ridiculous and no gradual reversal. The false image, the boggart itself, was obliterated, pulverized into primal energy until there was nothing left, not even a wisp of smoke. Everyone stood frozen. Lupin gaped, speechless. The students watching from outside looked at Harry with a mixture of awe and fear, as if they had seen a god or a monster. This was beyond school-level magic, a bare-bones combat style filled with primeval force. Harry let his hand fall. The electric arc at his fingertip faded. He was no longer the boy who needed a Patronus. He had become a fighter who could rip his inner demons apart with his bare hands. Lupin only waved him through, worried, as if any score would be inadequate after that. He didn't announce marks. What numbers could match what had happened? In the end, the three of them passed, overwhelmingly and undisputed. Word of their performances spread through the castle in half a day and turned into the greatest legend of that year's exam week. Their power had carved out an unbridgeable gulf between them and their peers, and it set the stage for still more dramatic events to come at the year-end feast. The end-of-year feast. Hogwarts' Great Hall was hung with Slytherin's silver-green banners. The candles threw shifting shadows across them, but could not lift the oppressive air. The 4 house tables were clearly separated. At the Slytherin table, every face wore the arrogance of people who expect to win. Their conversations hummed with triumph, and their eyes swept the other houses with open contempt. They led by a narrow margin and assumed the house cup was already theirs. Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff were quiet, chatting among themselves as if the banners above them meant little. The Gryffindor table, by contrast, was heavy with gloom. Students poked listlessly at their plates. The low conversations were edged with resentment and disappointment. Fred and George were uncharacteristically subdued, and Lee Jordan sat among them, glowering towards Slytherin. Jason, glass of pumpkin juice in hand, watched all of it with bored interest. To him, this was theater, a grand production about to reach its final scene. Dumbledore was the director, the students, extras to set the mood. He looked at Harry, Ron, and Hermione. The 3 of them were quieter than the rest of their house. Gaunt old house, and Hermione's pleading letters home had aged them past easy optimism. Compared to the darker specter of war, the fortunes of the House Cup felt small. At the head table, Albus Dumbledore rose. The old headmaster's presence had its own quiet authority. The hall hushed in an instant. His blue eyes, bright and clear again, took in the room and lingered for a beat on Jason before moving on. Another school year has passed, Dumbledore's voice carried to every corner. Before we enjoy our feast, there are a few last house points to be awarded. Jason shifted to a more comfortable position. The performance was beginning. Dumbledore's eyes went first to the trio at Gryffindor. Firstly, he said with a hint of approval, for Mr. Ron Weasley, who in his defense against the dark arts exam showed a calm tactical mind and precise control of the battlefield, I award Gryffindor 50 points. A smattering of applause at the Gryffindor table. Ron's face flushed. He ducked his head, embarrassed by the sudden attention. Secondly, Dumbledore continued, turning to Hermione, for Miss Hermione Granger, for the depth of her knowledge and flawless use of magic in danger, truly the makings of a tactical mind, I award Gryffindor 50 points. Hermione straightened, fingers trembling despite her attempt at composure. The applause grew, some at the table whispering, calculating. And finally, Dumbledore's voice rose slightly, his gaze fixed on Harry. For Mr. Harry Potter, for showing us the most precious quality of all, unparalleled courage in facing his deepest fears, I award Gryffindor 50 points. 150 points in all. The Gryffindor table erupted. We're tied, someone called. Fred and George leapt onto the benches, ready to lead the cheer. Then, cutting through the rising roar, came another sound. Sharp, deliberate applause from the Slytherin table. Clap, clap, clap. It rang out clean and forceful, enough to stop the fledgling cheers dead. Every head turned without agreement. Draco Malfoy stood and applauded vigorously, his face not sour but oddly fervent. Crabbe and Goyle, unsure, clapped awkwardly behind him. The scene dropped the hall into a strange hush. Gryffindor's cheers were strangled, Slytherin's smugness froze. At the staff table, Snape's mouth twitched, Professor McGonagall's brow creased in confusion. Dumbledore smiled. There was a flash of approval in his eyes. He raised his voice again and let it sweep past Harry, Ron, and Hermione to rest on Jason, who sat quietly at the far end of the long table as if none of it touched him. Courage takes many forms, Dumbledore said, voice full and deliberate. There is great courage in standing up to an enemy, and there is great courage in standing with your friends. His tone deepened. The hall seemed to hold its breath. This year, however, we have a special honor, one that transcends house and personal gain. It belongs to the future of the entire wizarding world. To commend Mr. Jason Lester, who through extraordinary wisdom and fearless courage has forged a new bright path for the future of the magical community, I award Gryffindor an additional 200 points. The words fell, and something like magic answered. The silver-green Slytherin banners hanging from the ceiling seemed to burst into flame, and in a heartbeat, the flames turned them to ash. Instantly, crimson and gold banners unfurled above the Gryffindor table, surging outward like a volcanic plume to dominate the ceiling. We won! The Gryffindor table exploded into sound. The hall rocked with cheers, the noise so fierce it seemed to strain the enchanted rafters. Students hugged, leaped, let out the joy they had been holding in all year. And then, most shocking of all, Draco Malfoy threw his fist into the air and bellowed at the top of his lungs. For Lord Lester! For the dawn of a new era! His voice dropped into the room like a thrown torch. It caught. The Slytherin table, which had clapped at the earlier awards, rose in a thunder of shouts and cries. The great hall split for a moment between two kinds of glory. 243. Promise on the platform. Those pure-blood scions who had long sworn their family's allegiance to Jason, and the students who had seen his thunderous methods and felt awe, rose after a moment's stunned silence. Theodore Nott, Vincent Crabbe, Gregory Goyle, one Slytherin after another followed Malfoy, raising fists and shouting fanatically, "For Lord Lester! For the new era!" Two entirely different cheers merged in the hall. One was the old cry for House Cup victory, the traditional glory of Hogwarts. The other pledged fealty to a new leader, to family interests, and a changing balance of power, Jason Lester's glory. What should have been an ordinary internal house competition, overseen by Dumbledore and undermined by betrayal within Slytherin, had become an unmistakable political alignment, an oath of allegiance to Jason. At the faculty table, the ministry official sent by Fudge, there to observe and, in truth, to monitor Dumbledore, looked pale as liver. He gripped his wine glass so hard his knuckles blanched and the stem creaked. Professor McGonagall, after an initial shock, allowed a relieved, gratified smile. She looked at Dumbledore with obvious admiration. Snape, outwardly impassive as he slowly cut the steak on his plate, hid a trembling hand beneath the table. Gryffindor had won the House Cup. But everyone knew the meaning of that victory had changed. Those 200 points, given to Gryffindor, read like Dumbledore, representing Hogwarts, bestowing the highest honor and a political endorsement on Jason Lester. His prestige inside the school soared. The old pureblood faction had split, and powerful, pragmatic forces had gathered under his banner. The feast ended with two mingled glories, and the tumultuous school year was closing. Platform 94 is where magic and the ordinary world meet most vividly. The Hogwarts Express lay like a sleeping red dragon on the tracks, emitting great plumes of steam that mixed with the acrid coal smell, the odd smells of pets, and the weight of anxious parental farewells. Hugs and kisses, hurried admonitions, students dragged heavy trunks and called friends' names. Owls hooted in their cages, toads tried to leap from pockets for a final adventure. It was bittersweet and noisy with partings. Yet in one corner of the platform, there was an island of quiet. Harry, Ron, and Hermione found Jason there. Their small group formed an unspoken shield against the surrounding clamor. They did not shout long goodbyes, because they all knew this summer wasn't a vacation, but the prelude to another war. Hermione's parents, dressed in proper Muggle clothes and looking slightly out of place among wizards, stood close by. Their smiles were forced, their eyes heavy with worry, fear and helplessness that hung over them like a storm cloud. The failure at Gaunt Old House and the danger Hermione's letter had revealed weighed on everyone like two burdens. "Hey, kid!" Sirius Black's warm voice cut through the tension like sunlight. He strode up in a well-cut dark blue robe that made him look tall and tidy. His long black hair was neat, a genuine grin spread across his face, and a faint, almost imperceptible glow seemed to surround him, an outward sign of the arcane energy that had transformed his body. He threw an arm around Harry's shoulders and patted him firmly, his eyes bright with elder pride. "How was your year? Ready for a real challenge?" Sirius winked. "Jason's got a big surprise for you. Don't go back to your aunt's this summer. Come with me to the City of Dawn. I'll oversee a full lightning element arcanist training myself. I guarantee that by the start of term, you'll be able to call a lightning dragon from your fingertips." Harry's eyes lit up. The City of Dawn, training with Sirius, focused arcane work. This was the perfect summer. The gloom that had sat on him eased. He nodded eagerly. Jason watched, smiling, then turned to Ron. A flash of envy crossed Ron's face, but he hid it quick. He'd long accepted that his strength wasn't an offense and that he played a supporting role. Jason clapped him on the shoulder with a firm hand. "Ron," he said, voice full of trust. "Fred and George's alchemy workshop has been swamped with orders from the Ministry and the Auror office. They're opening a second production line to make the latest arcane defensive gear. They need someone absolutely trustworthy to handle material allocation and day-to-day security." He looked Ron in the eye. "Your earth magic is the best defense. Your steadiness and reliability are exactly what I need. This summer, I want you to take charge of that line's safety. Remember, you'll be guarding more than equipment. You'll be protecting the lifeline of countless comrades on our future front lines." For once, Ron's simple, uncertain face shone with something new. To manage a production line, to be entrusted with such an important and fitting responsibility, this was concrete, meaningful. It wasn't cheering Harry on or half-casting a shield in the heat of battle. It was being needed. I promise I'll get the job done." Ron's voice came out strong, his cheeks flushed with excitement as he straightened and spoke with conviction. 244, Master of the Sky. Jason nodded, satisfied. He drew a breath and walked toward Hermione and her parents. As he approached, the Grangers' smiles grew tight. Mr. Granger stepped protectively in front of his wife and daughter, awe and wariness written across his face at the sight of this powerful young wizard. "Mr. Granger, Mrs. Granger, hello?" Jason lowered himself into a respectful stance, greeting them with a calm, sincere tone that carried no menace. Then he turned to Hermione. The softness in his face vanished. In its place was an unusual gravity. "Hermione, I know everything about your family." The words broke the fragile composure she'd been holding. Tears came, unstoppable, down Hermione's cheeks. Jason did not reach for her. He looked into her tear-filled, pleading eyes and spoke in a voice so clear it seemed to be carved into the moment. "Listen, Hermione. First, your cousin Daniel. I'll send people to find him and bring him home safely. Second, from now on, your family will receive the highest level of protection from the City of Dawn. Any hostility toward them will be treated as a direct provocation against me." Each sentence hit like a hammer, shattering the fear that had gripped Hermione. Jason took from his pocket a tiny silver object no larger than a fingernail, an exquisite pendant of cool metal etched with faint, complex runes. He placed it in Hermione's hand. "This is a miniature arcane beacon," he explained. "Give it to your parents. It can monitor magical fluctuations within 100 meters in real time. If any unauthorized magic approaches, Zero will be alerted immediately, and the nearest Guardian team will arrive within a minute. In the Muggle world, this is more effective than any law." The Grangers, listening, were in tears. They did not know what an arcane beacon or Zero was, but they understood the promise. Their daughter's friend was using his influence to provide an unbreakable umbrella of protection for them. "Also," Jason said, looking at Hermione with a sharp light in his eyes, "I won't let you be a passive victim. I need your intellect, Hermione. Your mind is far beyond ordinary." "I have already launched the ARC project," he continued, his voice low. "The Ministry of Magic is arresting people, so we'll get to them first. The ARC project will use every means to locate and shelter those who have accidentally awakened magic in the Muggle world before the Ministry can. They are the sparks of a new era, the future of change, and we cannot let them fall into the hands of Fudge and Umbridge's fools. Your summer assignment, Hermione, is to use the Muggle Internet, the space you know best, to find these awakened ones through news reports, forums, and social media. You are the bridge between the two worlds. No one can do this more efficiently than you." The promise and the mission lit something in Hermione that fear could not touch. She was no longer only a frightened family member. She was made essential to a rescue that felt sacred. Her knowledge became a weapon and a purpose. I understand," she said, scrambling to wipe her tears away. She clutched the arcane beacon, and resolve returned to her brown eyes. The train's whistle called long and low. Harry, Ron, and Hermione, three core members of the group, boarded the Hogwarts Express with clear goals and a heavy sense of duty. Jason watched them from the platform as the train eased away. Through the window, the three faces had shifted from confusion to a hard, new determination. A breathtaking chapter was about to open for them and for all of Hogwarts. The Hogwarts Express ran smoothly through Scotland's rolling green hills. Inside, the carriage buzzed with the end-of-term noise and relaxation. The odd sweetness of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans, the rich scent of chocolate frogs, the tang of fresh ink on parchment. Younger students traded wizard cards and cheered over rare Dumbledore finds. Older ones clustered to share Diagon Alley purchases and to argue about summer plans. In the compartment with Harry, Ron, and Hermione, the mood was lighter than it had been on the platform. The enormous, shapeless worry that had sat on their chests had been given edges and a path. Ron was in full boast, picturing his future as a production line safety supervisor and joking about flattening troublesome gnomes into pies with an Earthwall spell. Harry smiled and let Ron's chatter wash over him, though his mind kept returning to the lightning element arcanist training Sirius had described. Absent-mindedly, he extended a finger. A tiny electric arc danced on his fingertip and vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Hermione leaned against the window, watching the countryside slide past, her mind already assembling the outline of the ARC project Jason had set in motion. Her analytic engine was running at full speed, reforming panic into plans. All felt ordinary and possible until a scream cut through the carriage like a blade. What? What is that?" A voice full of terror came from the next compartment. It was a Ravenclaw student known for his calm erudition. Now he sounded as if he'd seen something utterly incomprehensible. Immediately after, other cries, sharp gasps, and the chaotic clatter of overturned chairs rippled down the train. Ron fell silent mid-boast. He and Harry exchanged a look, equal parts alarm and confusion. Something in the air had clearly shifted. 45. Declaration of war before dawn. Outside the train window, daylight dimmed without warning. The sky was still a clear, cloudless blue, but that blue was being covered by a spreading shadow, as if an invisible hand were reaching across the sun. Light seemed to be swallowed at a visible speed. A vast shadow rolled over the train and everything for kilometers around. Fields lost their color, the distant lake lost its shine, and the world beneath the shadow fell into an unnatural dusk. "What's happening?" someone breathed. "Is it a Dementor?" another whispered. "Impossible. It's too big." After a moment of panic, every student on the train pressed to the windows. Faces flattened against the cold glass as they craned their necks, searching for the cause of the terrible darkness. Then they saw it, a sight they would never forget. A city, a colossal city of grotesque black stone and cold, gleaming silver-gray metal hung above the clouds. Its underside was not smooth but jagged, a torn mass of massive rock, as though the top of a mountain range had been ripped away and suspended in the air. Between those rocks, blue arcane patterns flowed and flickered like veins, converging on a massive, heart-like energy core that pulsed in the city's center. That core fed the creature of steel and stone the power it needed to hold itself aloft. The legendary City of Dawn wasn't merely a name trailing through the Daily Prophet anymore. It wasn't talk among adult wizards. It was there, dominating the sky with an authority no one could mistake. Silence fell over the carriage. Laughter and chatter died as every throat was silenced by awe. Mouths hung open, eyes were wide. The students' minds struggled to process a scale of power that seemed beyond comprehension. Surrounding the floating city, a dozen or so airships patrolled in precise formations. Their sleek, futuristic lines looked out of place in this world. Hulls the color of deep ink blue, long, elegant bodies, energy engines along their flanks spitting pale blue flame and leaving brief, graceful trails in the sky. Sometimes they surged forward together like a hunting flock. Sometimes they shifted into complex aerial formations, showing startling maneuverability and discipline. Pioneer-class airships, the train and the flotilla passed each other over the Scottish countryside. From their seats, the students could make out details of the city: towering wizard towers, exotic botanical gardens under vast magical shields, broad plazas, and tiny figures, ants to them, moving between spectacular buildings. The sight knocked the wind out of everything the young wizards had been taught about power. Flying brooms, thestral carriages, even apparition, all felt primitive in the presence of an entity that could move a whole city and command a standardized aerial fleet. This wasn't merely magic. It was hegemony. It declared ownership of the sky. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were stunned as well. They had known about the city's existence and even been involved in parts of its building, but seeing it in full, formidable reality stirred a complicated mixture of pride and an instinctive chill. In the compartment behind them, Draco Malfoy was flushed with excitement. He threw the window open, letting the cold, high-altitude wind gust through the carriage. He jabbed a finger at the immaculate fleet and yelled to Crabbe and Goyle, his voice trembling with exhilaration. "See that? That's our future. It's the glory given by Lord Leicester. The sky belongs to us." Awe, fear, longing, exhilaration, a dozen emotions fought in every student's chest. Some of them might one day follow Jason Lester. Others might oppose him. But in that moment, all of them understood one thing clearly. A new era, dominated by Jason Lester, had arrived. The image of the city and its fleet seared itself into their memories, a brand burned into the end of that school year. It would become the indelible token of a changing world. While these future wizards stared up at their sky's new master, a political storm that would decide the magical world's fate was quietly gathering in London's center of power. City of Dawn, Command Center. Silence was a constant here. Through the huge curved windows, an endless sea of clouds rolled away, pierced by shafts of golden sunlight that haloed the suspended city. Below, the green patchwork of Britain peeked through breaks in the clouds like a distant chessboard. Jason stood with his hands clasped behind his back before the arcane sand table at the center of the command center, expression composed. Projected on the table was a three-dimensional map of Britain. Where once the sand table had unsettled with gray markers indicating Horcruxes, dozens of faint green lights now winked alive across towns and cities. Each green light, after a moment, was overlaid with a small golden symbol, indicating protection. This was the ARC project's first success. With Hermione's intelligence support and the covert help of the pureblood families loyal to him, an invisible net had quietly spread. New wizards, those who had unexpectedly awakened through meditation and who were still frightened and disoriented, were being discreetly located by the City of Dawn's guardians. They were taken to safe shelters before the Ministry's purification teams could find them. It was a race against time, a silent war fought in the dark for the future. "Commander, Zero's voice, flat and synthesized, broke through the stillness. Receiving highest priority encrypted communication, codename Night Owl. 246, a summer of change, 2 in 1. Jason didn't even lift an eyelid, as if he had anticipated it. Let him in. The map on the Arcane sandbox shifted instantly, becoming a constantly rotating encrypted interface of complex runes. At its center, a silver owl pattern opened its eyes. Lucius Malfoy's voice, magically encrypted and slightly distorted but still polite, came through. Master, the situation has changed. Fudge has completely lost control, Jason said flatly. There was a trace of disbelief in Lucius's tone. Disbelief at Fudge's recklessness that had somehow surprised even him. Just now, the emergency session of the Wizengamot concluded. All of Headmaster Dumbledore's proposals to grant legal status and educational rights to newly awakened wizards were rejected by the minister on the grounds of national security. He publicly labeled your meditation as a polluting form of dark arts that undermines the nation's foundations. Jason listened in silence, expressionless. Lucius drew a deep breath and delivered the real bombshell. To deal with the crisis caused by meditation and to counter your influence, Fudge, backed by the conservative faction, has secretly convened the International Confederation of Wizards. They passed a resolution. Lucius paused, choosing his words carefully. They have decided to restart an ancient event that has been suspended for nearly a century, the Tri-Wizard Tournament. The command center was quiet. Jason did not respond, so Lucius continued, exposing the political design behind the move. Master, according to my analysis, their objectives are clear and malicious. There are 3. First, to use a grand international spectacle to divert the magical world's attention from the awakening of meditation and the rights of new wizards, masking conflict under the sheen of prosperity and unity. Second, to use the tournament to showcase and legitimize traditional magic on the global stage, especially to sway undecided European powers away from the new arcane system you represent. And third, Lucius said cautiously, the most crucial, they aim to use this event to draw Beauxbatons and Durmstrang firmly into their camp. They seek to build an international political alliance centered on Hogwarts to oppose you and the City of Dawn. Continue monitoring, Jason ordered. Report any unusual activity immediately. Yes, my master, Lucius replied. The connection cut off, the silver owl faded, and the command center returned to silence. Jason turned slowly to the empty room. 0. Process intelligence. Command received. Initiating comprehensive analysis. On the Arcane sandbox, data surged like a breached dam. Records on Cornelius Fudge, Dolores Umbridge, the Ministry's conservative faction, remnants of Lord Voldemort's followers, and the political landscape across the European magical world were retrieved, collated, and analyzed. Seconds later, the stream steadied, and a line of blood-red runes projected onto the center of the display like a mark of warning. Triwizard Tournament. Below, Zero's conclusions appeared with cold, irrefutable logic. Comprehensive analysis. The probability of Minister Cornelius Fudge using this event for political suppression against you is 93.7%. The probability of remaining Death Eaters using the event to create chaos and attempt a resurrection ritual is 78.5%. Inference. This event will likely be the fuse for the first comprehensive public clash between old and new forces. Activate highest-level contingency plans. Jason finally showed an expression, a mocking smile, as if the whole world lay in the palm of his hand. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at land obscured by a sea of clouds, and spoke softly, as if to Zero, as if pronouncing judgment to the world. They love building stages. His voice was quiet but resonant through the empty command center. Fudge needs a stage to whitewash his crumbling era of peace and to pacify his flock frightened by the new age. Voldemort's followers need a stage too, to perform a ritual with enough spectacle to satisfy them. Turning his back to the clouds, like a god surveying humanity, a hint of control gleamed in his dark eyes. Then let them build it. Make the stage a bit bigger, a bit more magnificent. Invite every guest, turn on every spotlight. His smile deepened, edged with a cold pity. They will soon discover the script for this grand play has already been written by me. And they, and everything they cherish, are merely the clowns who raise the curtain, and then will be crushed by the tide of history. With that, The third school year closed under a declaration of domination. The shadow of war had become the bugle call before dawn. An epic drama, destined to overturn the entire magical world's landscape, was about to raise its bloody, magnificent curtain in the fourth year. Midsummer. While the old magical world bickered tediously over the revived Triwizard Tournament, a new empire with the City of Dawn at its heart was operating, expanding, and evolving at unimaginable speed. Promises made on Platform 9 Thwor at King's Cross were being realized one by one that hot summer. They transformed into gears, runes, and currents, driving the great wheel of change thunderously toward an uncertain future. Everyone, at their stations, contributed to the coming of the new era. Bunker Commander, Ron Weasley, City of Dawn, First Level, Industrial Zone. This industrial heart of the City of Dawn was carved directly into the floating city's rock foundation. More than a workshop, it was a true war bunker. Arcane lamps on the dome burned perpetually, casting daylight across the space, and the air was thick with the heat of smelting and the sharp scent of alchemical fumes. Rock Golem of 3, take that box of mithril ore to Furnace 3, and mind the floor. Don't step on what the goblins just polished. Ron Weasley's voice echoed through the bunker. He no longer sounded like the jealous, immature boy who used to follow Harry. His voice carried seasoned composure and unquestionable authority. He wore dark brown, enchanted work overalls, fireproof, curse-resistant, with a built-in cleaning charm. His red hair was tied back neatly. Freckles still dotted his face, but his blue eyes were focused and confident. He had grown into a man who could command 3-meter-tall rock golems he had personally activated with earth magic to do heavy lifting. Nearby, uniformed house elves used precise tools to sort and log newly arrived magical materials. A massive rune elevator disgorged several tons of dragon blood iron ore. Ron raised a hand and barked, "Gravity spell!" The ore floated on an invisible force to the processing area. Ron pressed both palms to the wall of a newly excavated transport tunnel. Fossil to mud, solidification. The rough rock flowed like water, then re-solidified, several times harder than before, with a mirror-smooth surface. It was routine, security for an underground fortress. A house elf ran up shrieking, "Mr. Supervisor," and handed him a freshly produced vest that glowed faintly blue. "The new batch of Guardian Model 1 Arcane Defensive Vests is ready. Please inspect." Ron didn't need instruments. He poured a thread of magic into the vest to test its circuits, drew his wand, and cast a sharp cutting charm. The spell struck the fabric, produced a faint ripple, and then dissipated. Qualified. Notify Fred and George, ready for shipment. He allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. He wasn't just protecting a production line, he was protecting lives on the battlefield to come. Responsibility gave him real purpose. Perspective. Arc Navigator, Hermione Granger, City of Dawn, Arc Project Command Center. The command center's technology felt alien in the old magical world. Under a giant holographic star map, rows of screens flashed data. Muggle technicians in white coats and wizards in robes worked together. The clicks of keyboards and murmured spells formed the symphony of a new era. Hermione Granger stood at the conductor's podium. Dressed in a simple white uniform, her chestnut hair tied back, she looked capable and calm. No longer the anxious prefect, she had become a cool, decisive commander. Northwest London. High-energy magic spike detected. Suspected mental energy discharge. Localized power outage. 0. Cross-reference with satellite cloud maps and the city power grid. Data cross-referenced. Target locked. Orphanage. Awakened signature matches. Age 13. Male. Good. Hermione's gaze shifted to the global map, where a red dot flashed over London. Order First Dawn Squad to deploy immediately. Ensure contact with the subject before the Ministry's Accidental Magic Reversal Squad. Prioritize pacification and safety. If necessary, authorize confundo. She analyzed the data and dispatched a team of squibs and trained Muggle operatives, racing across the globe for the sparks of the new era. A communication request popped up. Hermione accepted. A slightly thin young man appeared on the screen, her cousin Daniel. He had been rescued from Ministry detention by Jason's elite squad and brought to the floating city for meditation training. "Hermione, look, look," Daniel crowed, pointing at a small desk lamp. He closed his eyes, concentrated, and the bulb glowed faintly but steadily. "I did it. I lit it with my mind. Seeing her cousin's flushed excitement and the light that symbolized hope and freedom, Hermione finally allowed herself a true, relieved smile that summer. In it, there was no fear, only warmth and determination. Perspective, Thunder Controller, Harry Potter's City of Dawn, Gravity Training Ground. Faster, Potter! Your spells are slower than a burping goblin. Sirius Black bellowed, sending curses at Harry with the force of a trained Auror. Each attack shattered when it met sudden silver-white arcs of electricity half a meter from Harry's body. He stood, unmoving, wrapped in a constantly flowing thunder armor of pure lightning. He didn't dodge. He let the attacks strike and explode in brilliant sparks on the armor. His growth had long since passed Sirius's expectations. "Warm-up's over, Sirius." Harry grinned, a confident grin. He raised his right hand, palm up, and violent lightning condensed and compressed there. The smell of ozone filled the air. The light made Sirius blink. In Harry's hand, a 3-meter spear formed entirely of lightning, raw, destructive power. "Thunder Spear!" he roared and threw. The spear became a silver-white streak, tearing through the air and striking a target of high-strength alloy 1,000 meters away with a deafening boom. The target was pierced and melted into a pool of red-hot slag. In combat and arcane application, Harry Potter had surpassed the average Auror. He was no longer the boy who needed protection. He had become a living weapon. Hogwarts, Headmaster's Office. Albus Dumbledore read the reports on his desk. The Weasley brothers' alchemy factory was mass-producing arcane defensive equipment at a scale sufficient to arm a small army. The Arc project had sheltered over 50 newly awakened wizards in a month. They were receiving systematic education in the City of Dawn. And Harry Potter could conjure a thunder spear capable of piercing dragon hide. These rates of development, this terrifying organizational capability, shocked even Dumbledore, a man who had weathered many storms. He looked out the window toward the City of Dawn hovering above the clouds. Jason's forces were flourishing across military, civilian, and intelligence spheres, demonstrating a vitality the old world could not match. And the Ministry was still arguing over whether to release doves or owls at the Triwizard opening ceremony. Dumbledore sighed softly. He knew that when the 4th year began and the Triwizard tournament, so cherished by the old powers as a stage, was staged, it would not be an even contest. It would be a one-sided crushing by the new era. 247. The Old Man's Gaze Hogwarts, the Headmaster's Office. The summer sun still shone, throwing warm, dappled light through the Gothic windows. Tiny dust motes drifted in the beams. Outside, the Forbidden Forest lay green and dense, the Black Lake glittered, and everything looked peaceful and whole. That peace never reached Albus Dumbledore. His heart lay under a vast shadow. His long fingers tapped the smooth desk where a report had just been delivered by Fawkes. The parchment was not written in magical ink, but had been neatly printed at a Muggle press. Arc Project, Biweekly Report. The heading was concise. Below it, a cold cascade of startling figures. New awakened in Sanctuary, 127. Confirmed high magic reaction zones in the Muggle world, 34. Estimated new awakened in the next half-month, over 300. Hermione Granger was the author. Her lines carried her trademark rigor and logic, but behind the numbers, Dumbledore saw something far larger, the Muggle world waking up at a speed he had never anticipated. 6 billion people, a single spark of meditation cast among them could become an inferno. He felt an urgency he had never felt before, and a sense of helplessness as an old order threatened to be swept away. He closed his eyes. Fawkes gave a clear cry. Through the Phoenix's shared sight, Dumbledore's consciousness leapt across hundreds of kilometers and descended on the City of Dawn, hovering above a sea of clouds. He saw Ron Weasley directing rock golems in a massive industrial bunker, allocating mountain-like stores with clear, decisive commands. His face no longer childish, now lined with responsibility and authority. He saw Hermione in a command center of light screens, analyzing global data streams, mobilizing elite teams, and racing with the Ministry's purifiers to rescue nascent sparks. He saw Harry Potter on a gravity training ground, his body wrapped in destructive lightning, the thunder spear condensed in his palm, its force outstripping any offensive charm he had known before. These children he had watched grow, were exploding in power in ways that defied the old logic of magic. And himself? Dumbledore drew his awareness back to his own body. His promotion to the late first tier of arcanists had restored his 40-year-old appearance. His magic felt purer, more concentrated. Yet he knew that this was only an intensification of the old path, not a real change. The difference was their growth model. They were like saplings of a world tree, breaking soil and extending new branches each day. He was like a gem, polished again and again, brighter, but the same at heart. Perhaps only by absorbing more complex knowledge and experience could he complete the transformation. A gentle rap at the door interrupted his thoughts. Severus Snape entered, still in black robes, his expression as dour as ever, but his steps steadier and more certain. He placed a secret intelligence report on the desk and whispered, "From Lucius. Fudge has completely lost his mind. He's secretly colluding with conservative factions in the International Confederation of Wizards. They plan to politically try and militarily suppress Jason at the upcoming Tri-Wizard tournament under the pretext of endangering international wizarding security." Dumbledore's brow deepened. Snape added, "And another matter. Although we severely damaged Lord Voldemort's remnant at the gaunt old house, he was not utterly annihilated. The remnants have grown more cunning. They've abandoned known strongholds and slipped into crevices we can't find, like startled rats, ready to strike at any time. Internal strife, external threats, two heavy mountains pressed on Dumbledore's chest." After reporting, Snape withdrew quietly, leaving the old man with his thoughts. Night fell. Moonlight like mercury poured through the windows and spilled across the cold floor. Dumbledore rose slowly and crossed to the quiet portrait on the wall. Ariana smiled in the painting, her blue eyes untouched by time. He reached out and let his fingertips brush the cool frame, as if he could touch the deep, unending regret buried in his heart. He closed his eyes. The busy office dissolved, the world narrowed to absolute silence and darkness. A scene he had never spoken of unfolded clearly in the recesses of his mind, after Jason had exhausted his life to resurrect Hermione in that vast transaction with death. Jason had used the future of the entire magical world as bargaining power to secure Death's aid and open a path forward for everyone. Dumbledore had been a witness and guarantor in that bone-chilling soul space. There, humbled, he had asked a single question that had troubled him his whole life, and Death had answered. A cold, supreme voice echoed through his soul. It was both promise and pact. When he, Jason Lester, reaches the 4th tier and ascends to legend, I will return Ariana's shattered soul. That promise burned in him like an untouchable flame. It became a tangible goal with a clear path and conditions. To protect this fragile world, and more than that, to be able to say, "I'm sorry" to the sister he had wronged, Dumbledore felt his heart seize. Veins stood out on his hands from the intensity of his emotion. A hunger for power rose within him, the power to reverse fate and defy death, a hunger that nearly consumed his reason. When he opened his eyes, the weariness and hesitation were gone. In their place came an unprecedented resolve. He would step onto the board himself and move the pieces. He looked at Fawkes, perched nearby. "Fawkes, my friend," he said softly, "send a message to Jason. Tell him I'm coming to see him in his city." 248, the intersection of old and new worlds, the City of Dawn, Arc Project Command Center. This was the pulse of a new era, the heart of change. Outside the vast curved floor-to-ceiling windows lay an endless sea of clouds. A holographic star map slowly rotated in the air, while teams of Muggle experts and wizards worked at their stations with careful, ordered efficiency. The sound of runes humming and data streaming wove into a precise, almost musical symphony. Without warning, a golden-red flame flared up in the very center of the command center. It was warm but not scorching, and it carried a sacred, noble aura. Every motion stopped. Dozens of guarded, astonished faces turned toward the flame. As it dissipated, 2 figures were revealed, an elegant phoenix and an old man in a deep blue, star-patterned robe, his silver hair falling like a waterfall. Albus Dumbledore had arrived. He ignored the guardians, who instinctively raised wands and weapons, and stood perfectly still, letting his sharp, clear blue eyes take in the place he was setting foot in for the first time. He saw enormous screens flashing with streams of data, arcane-driven instruments, and the close cooperation of Muggles and wizards. He felt the city itself vibrate underfoot with a steady, powerful rhythm. Everything here thrummed with life, efficiency, and a foreign-sounding taste of future power. Seeing it in person, rather than through Fawkes's vision, struck him 1,000 times more forcefully. The conviction in his heart deepened. Let them come. Jason's voice cut through the hush over the command center's internal channels, quelling any rising commotion. A moment later, he stepped out from a private passage. He met Dumbledore without surprise and inclined his head. "Headmaster, sir." "Jason." Dumbledore's voice was soft but direct. He did not skirt the matter. "I have hit a bottleneck. The power of a First-Order Arcanist is enormous," he went on plainly, "but it is not sufficient to decide the course of the coming war. Against Fudge's International Confederation of Wizards, against Lord Voldemort, who has hidden his Horcruxes, I need greater power." He met Jason's eyes without evasiveness. The greatest white wizard of his age openly admitted his limitation to a student. Jason listened without interruption. When Dumbledore finished, Jason made a small gesture that invited him to follow. "Come with me, Headmaster." He led Dumbledore through several layers of guarded portals, into a silent elevator, and down to the true core of the floating city. The chamber that opened before them was a magnificent circular hall. Above, the dome was inscribed with a complex array of runes that slowly revolved like a miniature galaxy. In the center lay no roaring furnace, but a tranquil circular pool. It brimmed with condensed elemental energy, flowing like liquid starlight, a dreamlike, shifting iridescence, serene and beautiful, yet radiating a pressure so formidable that even creatures below legendary level would feel it and tremble. "This is the elemental pool," Jason said, his voice reverberating through the vast hall. "The energy heart of the City of Dawn, the power you need, is here." He turned to Dumbledore, his expression suddenly stone serious. "To break through to a second-order arcanist and become a true archmage, you must forge an arcane heart. It is an exacting, delicate process." Jason reached out. A tendril of light was drawn from the pool and took shape in his palm as a miniature, spinning nebula. The ritual requires drawing an enormous quantity of pure magic from the pool, then using your will as the only instrument to compress and forge that energy billions of times inside your soul until it solidifies into a stable core. The City of Dawn can provide nearly infinite, absolutely pure elemental energy, he continued. That spares you decades, even centuries, of gathering and purifying power yourself. If your will is strong enough, the condensation of an arcane heart need not be difficult. His tone shifted as the nebula in his palm wavered. But it is extremely dangerous. Compressing such power within the soul is perilous. If your will weakens even a little, the unrestrained force will erupt. He closed his hand. The nebula collapsed in silence. The consequence is not injury, nor merely a backlash. It is an explosion, an irreversible explosion at the level of the soul. Your soul would be vaporized in an instant, shattered down to its most primitive energy particles. No ghost, no portrait, no chance of reincarnation. You would vanish from this world entirely. Silence fell heavy in the hall. Only the elemental pool continued its slow, inevitable flow, a living demonstration of creation and destruction. Dumbledore stared at the pool's placid starlight. There was no fear in his blue eyes, only focus. In his mind, he saw Harry shaping a spear of lightning with unbending resolve, Ron's steady face, Hermione's relieved smile, and finally, the pale, clear face of his sister Ariana. When he reaches the Fourth Order, I will return Ariana's soul. The old promise echoed through him. He turned to Jason, his voice calm as a still sea but carrying the weight of a storm within. To protect these children from being consumed by the war. He paused, then added, quieter, and to have a chance to see Ariana again with my own eyes. In that moment, he was no longer the strategist or the revered headmaster. He was an old man willing to stake everything on a final, desperate gamble for family and for those he had vowed to protect. He inclined his head slightly and spoke the words that could alter wizarding history. "Jason, please help me." Jason studied the silver-haired man and the absolute resolve in his eyes. For a long moment, he said nothing. He saw in Dumbledore a reflection of himself, the same relentless determination to achieve a goal at any cost. He understood then that Dumbledore was not merely an ally, but a fellow traveler on a thorn-strewn path. "As you wish, Headmaster," Jason said at last. He turned, issuing orders that snapped through the chamber like a spell. 0. Floating city. Enter maximum alert status. Connect to the elemental pool core. Prepare for high-energy transmission. Clear the top meditation chamber of the central tower. Prepare the second-order arcane heart forging ritual for the headmaster of Hogwarts, Albus Dumbledore. 249. Trials of Promotion City of Dawn, Central Tower, top-tier meditation chamber. This was the quietest place in the entire floating city. Dumbledore sat cross-legged on a circular platform carved from a single slab of astral obsidian. Around him, the pure four-element energies turned slowly like a cosmic nebula, dense enough to condense into a shimmering mist. Several floors above, in the control room, Jason stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching a large monitoring screen. Streams of data refreshed rapidly across it, tracking every flicker of energy in the chamber and printing Dumbledore's vital signs in precise detail. Energy output stable, mental fluctuation frequency increasing. Zero's voice echoed in the control room. Jason's expression flickered with a complicated mix of emotion. He remembered his own breakthrough attempt. No elemental pool, no luxury. He had been alone in a crude basement, leaning on dozens of rune arrays, drawing threadbare elemental power from the air bit by bit. Each compression had been a knife edge. One slip could mean eternal ruin. The apparatus and safety provided to Dumbledore now represented the path Jason had opened for those who followed. Principal, I'm about to initiate overload mode. Guard your mind, Jason said into the communicator, calm and steady. Do it, Dumbledore replied, brief and resolute. Jason inhaled and gave the command. 0 elemental pool overload. Understood. Promotion ritual is commencing. For an instant, it felt as if a single small Big Bang had been set off. The elemental nebula that had been gently turning around Dumbledore suddenly went violent. A titanic, tsunamic surge of elemental power condensed into a multicolored torrent and tore toward him from every direction. In an instant, Dumbledore felt as if his soul had been cast into an erupting volcano. His proud, well-honed magic circuits, his lifetime of learning and skill, seemed fragile and exposed against this primeval, law-born force. He was a tiny boat in a cosmic storm of creation and destruction. Intricate spells and practiced transfigurations he knew by heart were shredded, rendered useless before the raw will of the elements. He had to let go of everything he had built to survive. But the true test had only just begun. The moment his soul began to merge with the raging law, his deepest fears and regrets, those he had wrapped in wisdom and responsibility, were magnified and forced into reality as brutal, living illusions. The first apparition was Ariana. She was not the serene girl of his memory. She lay curled in a cold corner, trembling with uncontrollable magic. Her eyes, once pure blue, glowed with despair, pain, and hatred. "Why, brother?" she asked. "Why did you chase that damned greater good? Why couldn't you stay with me?" The second illusion was his old friend turned rival, Gellert Grindelwald. They stood on a tower peak, wands flaring, the blood pact broken in their duel. Grindelwald's mouth twisted into a mad smile as he taunted him. "Albus, look at yourself. How are you different from me? You sacrifice for your order, I for my idea. Both of us calculating, both of us willing to trade lives for a vision. Do you deny you ever thought of using power to rule these ignorant people?" One image followed another. Students sacrificed to a supposed greater good, allies used and discarded, lives ruined by plans carried out in his name. Each scene became a thorn that drove into his soul, tearing at his resolve. "Give up, Albus," a voice echoed inside him, his own voice, merciless. "Your life is atonement piled on atonement. You seek power to satisfy a weak craving for control." Under the relentless assault of self-accusation and memory, his will began to crumble. The cluster of energy forming at the center of his soul flickered, threatening to tear itself apart. At that critical moment, a new vision pushed through the fog, scattering the inner demons. He saw Harry's eyes, bright as lightning, unbowed as he faced down his own boggart. He saw Ron's face, gone from boyishness to responsibility, issuing orders in a bunker. He saw Hermione's relieved, warm smile after learning her cousin had been saved. He saw Jason, with hair that had turned white in the trials, after he had brought Hermione back, answering simply, "I just wanted her to live." And then, from the depths of his soul, he heard Death's promise, "I will return Ariana's shattered soul." Not for some abstract greater good, not for a nebulous world order. Dumbledore's soul roared back. He wanted power to protect the pure smiles of these children. He wanted power to have the chance to stand before the sister he had wronged and say, from the heart, I'm sorry. That single, bright, uncompromising desire struck him like lightning through an eternal night. It cut through the darkness and reforged his will into an unbreakable point of light. Break, he commanded his soul. The Hall of Illusions shattered. Clinging to that singular thought, Dumbledore seized the raging torrent of elemental law and impressed his will upon it. He chose the power he would wield, not destruction or conquest, but two principles he had upheld his whole life and only now fully understood: protection and order. The moment his will linked to those laws, a new, vast power flowed through him, sacred, majestic. It burst outward in a visible shockwave that swept the meditation chamber. The once wild elemental nebula became orderly and obedient, like subjects kneeling before a sovereign. Every alarm in the control room fell silent. The data stream tracking Dumbledore's vitals locked onto a new baseline, far beyond human limits. On the screen, the figure in the chamber glowed in soft white light. Jason allowed himself a relieved smile. The most dangerous phase was over. Dumbledore had completed the transformation at the soul level. Only the final step remained, condensing that new power into a usable form. Inside the control room, Jason watched the light display. The data stream of Dumbledore's vital signs had climbed to a steady, terrifying peak. The tame elemental nebula in the meditation chamber was being drawn into a new power, suffused with sanctity and order, consolidating around the figure wrapped in soft white light at the center. The final condensation finished. Buzz, with a deep resonance as if something in another dimension had stirred, the heavy alloy door of the central high tower slid silently open to both sides. As soon as it did, every lingering energy tremor fell still. The white light faded, and a tall figure stepped out from the silence beyond the doorway. Jason's pupils tightened. The man who emerged was startlingly young. He was no longer the bent elder with half-moon spectacles. His posture was as straight as a pine, his face restored to that of a man around 30, vigorous and smooth, every wrinkle erased, his skin newly vital. The familiar spectacles were gone, replaced by a pair of deep blue eyes like the summer night sky. In them sat the wisdom of a century, and deeper still, an imposing majesty and authority that made one hesitate to meet them head-on. Only his long silver hair, like moonlight, and his neatly kept beard hinted at the long years he had lived and the constant gentleness beneath them. This was a reborn Albus Dumbledore, the peak of youth fused with endless wisdom, a second-order arcanist, also an archmage. "Congratulations, Principal," Jason said sincerely as he approached. Dumbledore smiled and flexed his fingers, feeling the unprecedented surge of power inside him, as if he could pry apart the laws of the world with ease. "This feeling is intoxicating," he murmured. His voice had returned to the clear, magnetic timbre of his younger years. "Jason, thank you." His eyes landed on Jason, and he offered no more words of gratitude. He understood that repayment would be through deeds from now on. Dumbledore surveyed the futuristic control room, then reached out and swiped through the empty air. Before them, a barrier of highly condensed holy light formed as if summoned from nothing. It looked fragile, translucent, and crystalline, its surface traced with sacred, complex runes of order. Yet Jason could feel the terrifying force of law that it contained. It did not merely repel attacks with magic, it defined impassibility itself through the law of order. "This is a core spell I gleaned from the laws of protection and order," Dumbledore explained softly. "I call it Holy Guardian. In theory, no power can bypass it so long as my will holds." It was a declaration of total command over his newfound ability. Jason nodded. That meant Hogwarts now provided a second stabilizing force for the City of Dawn, standing alongside him. Together they moved to the immense curved window of the command center and looked down at the mortal world, faint against the sea of clouds below. Their exchange now felt less like mentor and pupil and more like a quiet council between two equals, two powerhouses whose wills could reshape the world's order. "Jason," Dumbledore said at last, his gaze grave and unflinching, "from now on, Hogwarts will not only be your support." He turned to face Jason fully, those starry blue eyes fixed on him. "It will also be the sharpest sword in your hand. Those shadows of the old era, the corrupt obstacles that block the world's progress. I will cut them down for you, one by one." The promise rang out and carried weight. It marked a transformation. This guardian of the old ways, having embraced a new power, would not merely defend the past, he would strike at it, becoming a proactive champion of the new age. Jason's faction now counted a second-order arcanist, and its strength had leaped qualitatively, enough to directly confront and even crush any traditional magical force. Summer was drawing to a close. Soon the Scarlet Hogwarts Express would again glide into Platform 9 3/4 at King's Cross to bring a fresh cohort of students. On the surface, everything seemed the same as any other year, but the floating city thrummed with a taut anticipation, as if a storm were gathering. The Goblet of Fire for the Triwizard Tournament had already arrived at Hogwarts, and delegations from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang were preparing their grand entrances for the opening feast. All of Europe's magical community fixed its eyes on that ancient Scottish castle, expecting a celebration of the old magic's revival. They did not know that this year Hogwarts harbored a savior who could wield the Thunder Spear, an arcane genius who had built the floating city, and a headmaster newly returned to his prime, truly godlike. With two archmages at its helm, what stance would Hogwarts take as the Triwizard Tournament, never destined to be peaceful, unfolded? How would it face the shifting tides sweeping the magical world? As summer ended, the curtain rose on the fourth year amid expectation and the surge of unseen currents. 251. The call from deep underground City of Dawn, Command Center. Several days had passed since Dumbledore had advanced to the second tier. The entire floating city basked in an unprecedented confidence. With two second-tier arcanists among them, they now had the strength to face any known threat directly. Jason and Dumbledore, both restored to peak condition, stood over a massive arcane sand table, reviewing every detail of Dumbledore's ascent and planning for the upcoming and no doubt eventful fourth school year. On the table, a model of Hogwarts Castle stood, surrounded by a dense lattice of defensive runes. Fudge and his allies want to use the Triwizard Tournament as a platform to showcase the glory of traditional magic and isolate us, Jason said, tracing a finger across the model. A pale blue light curtain rose to mark the approach routes of the Beauxbatons and Durmstrang delegations. But they've overlooked one thing. The one who owns the stage isn't always the one who built it. They're still thinking in old political terms, Dumbledore agreed with a small smile, his eyes deep and starbright, full of the quiet assurance his new power lent him. He viewed the world now from a higher, more strategic vantage. A simple imbalance of power can crush any conspiracy. Exactly, Jason said. We need an entirely new curriculum for Hogwarts. By the time the Triwizard begins, the magical world should see the strength of wizards in this new era. At that moment, a sharp but not unpleasant alarm shattered the command center's calm. It was a highest priority signal. "Commander," Zero's synthesized voice announced, "receiving an emergency transmission marked highest priority from Elder Rust Ironheart of the Earth Elemental Plane. Signal source, unexplored deep region." Jason and Dumbledore exchanged a look. Surprise, faint but real. The goblins were measured and precise. For them to declare a highest priority emergency meant something extraordinary had been found. "Connect it," Jason ordered. The sand table's model vanished, and a somewhat shaky holographic feed flickered into being, streaked with interference. On screen stood a white-haired goblin elder, his beard braided into intricate knots, framed by an enormous pitch-dark cavern. He looked equal parts excited and awed. The light from massive search beams only hinted at the immensity that surrounded him. "Lord Lester," the elder cried, voice trembling with excitement. "We have a major discovery. A deep ore exploration team accidentally broke into an unknown chamber sealed by powerful energies, sealed for at least tens of thousands of years." He pivoted and motioned the camera back. Even through the poor signal, the sight was staggering. A colossal subterranean space filled with ruins of buildings cast from an unknown metal. The architecture was rough and monumental, sharp and angular as though cut by some divine axe. Ancient, desolate, and enormous. From preliminary scans, Rust Ironheart continued, pointing to a shattered spire that nearly grazed the cavern ceiling. This is not goblin architecture, nor does it belong to any known subterranean race. Based on the clues we found, this appears to be a long-forgotten human ruin. Half an hour later, in the City of Dawn's central laboratory, a technological heart that contrasted sharply with the rest of the magical world, several metal fragments urgently teleported out from the goblin site and floated inside a pale blue energy field above an analysis table. Fred and George Weasley hovered over them, eyes shining with the delight of craftsmen who had found a masterpiece. Dressed in white, enchanted lab coats, they adjusted detection runes and fed readings into a cascade of glowing displays. Merlin's beard, Fred breathed, flushed. This alloy formula, I've never seen anything like it. Base is adamantine, but fused with at least 17 rare magical metals we've never cataloged. Its energy conductivity, at least 30% higher than the mithril alloys we use now. Not only that, George said, grave as he pulled up an enlarged rune structure, look at these engravings. They're worn, but the principles are similar to our arcane systems: energy cores, conduction circuits, stabilization nodes. The basic framework's the same. The style is older, rougher, like an early prototype of an arcane civilization. He looked at Jason, voice near a whisper, and delivered a verdict as if unveiling a sudden truth. It's like studying an advanced magical language and stumbling across the earliest hieroglyphs of that language. The implication was clear. In some distant age, a human civilization had mastered arcane technologies, reached down into the earth elemental plane, and left these ruins behind. This discovery could rewrite the history of arcane origins and reveal systems parallel to, or even ancestral to, Jason's own arcane codex. But the site had been sealed for tens of thousands of years. The unknown risks were huge. I can't go personally, Jason said, shaking his head. He had to remain in the City of Dawn to oversee preparations for Hogwarts and command the city. We'll assemble an elite vanguard. He looked at Sirius Black, who had stepped into the lab as news arrived. Sirius, Jason said, steady, I appoint you captain of Pathfinder Team 1. You'll lead the exploration. Sirius's eyes lit with fierce enthusiasm. Though he had advanced to a first-tier arcanist and now served as a training instructor, the marauder's blood in him still burned for adventure and glory. I'll get it done, he said, chest proud, voice ringing. We need technicians. Fred and George said in unison, pointing at the fragments. We're going. We must see those runes with our own eyes, 10,000 times better than analyzing chips back at the lab. Count me in. Ron stepped forward from the industrial zone, no longer the scrawny boy of old. He'd grown sturdier, his face trading boyishness for a calm confidence. Down there, my earth magic will be invaluable. Clearing passages, building defenses, constructing camps. I'm the best fit. Jason allowed himself a satisfied smile. A driven captain, 2 top technical experts, and a wizard whose affinity suited the environment. Exactly the core he'd wanted. He turned to Zero. Equip Pathfinder Team 1 with the latest Pathfinder 3 multi-environment suits. Give Sirius the emergency spatial beacon so he can contact you at any time, and so we can open a one-way teleport channel if necessary. Understood, Commander, Zero replied. A short time later, in the plane teleportation hall beneath the floating city, a vast chamber crowned by a rotating star chart and a rune array 30 meters across, the teleportation gate glowed silvery blue at the heart of the floor, rippling like water. The team stood assembled in the center, clad in silver gray, full-coverage Pathfinder 3 suits. Faint energy patterns ran across the suits' surfaces. Their helmets had panoramic visors and integrated life support, magic amplification, physical enhancement, and multidimensional comms. In under an hour, the City of Dawn's organizational power and talent depth had produced an elite squad, a first-tier leader backed by top technicians and an Earth affinity specialist. Equipment check, Sirius said calmly over the comms. Technical analysis module, normal. Rune scanning array, normal. Earth affinity module, 100%. Depart. He took the first step into the shimmering gate and led his team through. Their forms dissolved into light and were gone. Dumbledore and Jason watched the gate close slowly. An ancient human ruin sealed for tens of thousands of years, Dumbledore murmured, a note of seriousness in his deep blue eyes. As a second-tier arcanist, he felt something emanating from that sealed darkness, an ancient presence that made him uneasy. It was not malevolent in any obvious sense, Nor was it chaotic. It was a more primal, deeper stillness, as if whatever lay sleeping there had been forgotten even by time itself. 252. Lost Ark Earth Elemental Plane. A heavy world of endless rock, soil, and mineral. There was no sky, no sun, moon, or stars, only an oppressive silence and absolute darkness. When the light from the dimensional portal faded, Pathfinder Team 1 found themselves in a safe cave Elder Rust Ironheart had prepared in advance. All units, report status. Sirius's voice was calm and steady through the suit's comms. He scanned the oppressive landscape, his animagus instincts keeping him sharp. Ron Weasley, status good. The Earth Elemental's here. I feel at home, Ron said, a note of excitement in his voice. He even removed his helmet and drew in a deep breath of the mineral-scented air. Fred Weasley, Technical Analysis Module Normal. Collecting environmental data. Gravity here is 1.7 times the main planes, and the air is full of metallic particulates. George Weasley, Rune Scanning Array Normal. Commander, the energy reaction from that rock wall ahead is abnormal, extremely dense. That should be the entrance to the sealed area. Elder Rust Ironheart and a band of goblin warriors waited respectfully nearby. Seeing Pathfinder Team 1's futuristic exploration suits, the goblins' eyes shone with undisguised awe and envy. Envoys of Lord Lester, Elder Rust Ironheart bowed. Please follow me. The Forgotten City lies just beyond this layer of rock. They followed the goblins through a narrow, roughly cut passage. Faintly glowing fluorescent stones were set into the rock walls, barely lighting the way. The air grew thicker and the aura more ancient and desolate. After an unknown stretch of time, the passage opened abruptly. Everyone froze and then gasped. Before them yawned an enormous underground cavern, wide and tall enough to fit a dozen Hogwarts castles. Jagged rock shelved overhead. Below, a bottomless darkness. Massive crystal clusters hung from the ceiling like reverse mountains, sparkling with mineral light and turning the cavern into a strange, dreamlike world. Hanging from the very center of the ceiling was a colossal stalactite, an inverted god sword. A city clung to its surface. It was an ancient, dead city. Buildings layered along the stalactite's contours, severe and geometric. Stone bridges spanned between districts, and spires rose toward the abyss. Silence wrapped the place as if time had stopped long ago. "This is an ancient ruin?" Ron murmured, awestruck. "Begin the scan," Sirius ordered, recovering his composure. "Ron, make a safe passage to the city gate. Fred, George, keep scanning and record every energy reaction. Stay alert." Ron stepped forward and placed both hands on the cliff-edge rock. A yellowish-brown light flashed in his eyes. "Rocks, obey. Build me a bridge." At his call, the stone shuddered and writhed, extending until a wide, sturdy bridge formed and reached the ruined city gate. They crossed into the silent streets. The sense of abandonment deepened. The buildings were magnificent but eroded. "Look at that wall," Fred exclaimed. They turned to see a faded fresco on the outer wall of a great hall. Tall human figures, armor akin to the Pathfinder suits and wielding strange weapons, were depicted among them. Beside the humans, shorter but fierce goblins fought as comrades. Opposite them, however, was an enemy the artist had refused or feared to show. Instead of a figure, the artist had carved a churning, relentless tide of symbols, dense, looping marks that seemed to embody chaos and greed. Even from a distance, the patterns induced a visceral unease. "So humans and goblins fought together," Sirius said, thoughtful. "Our ancestors recorded something like this," Elder Rust Ironheart said, voice threaded with melancholy, "but the history was lost to time. I never expected to see proof." They pushed toward the city center, where the buildings grew grander until they reached a vast, semicircular structure that rose like a mountain. "Looks like a hangar?" George guessed, eyeing its sealed gate, which had fused into the surrounding rock. "Ron?" Sirius was concise. Ron nodded and pressed both palms to the stone door. Fossil to mud, earthy magic surged from him in a dense, yellow tide. The seemingly indestructible rock softened and dissolved, turning into viscous mud that slithered away. When the several-meter-thick door yielded, the team stared into the hangar. Bathed in their suit lights, a gargantuan object lay dormant, a steel behemoth the size of Hogwarts. Unlike Jason's City of Dawn, an arcane flying vessel, the craft before them was purely mechanical. Massive metal pipes, intricate gears, and brass boilers as big as small mountains, covered with rivets and weld seams, filled the hull. It was a steampunk colossus. its power long gone, its hull scarred by battle and rusted by age, yet its structure remarkably intact. Its sheer silhouette spoke of past glory. "Oh my," the Weasleys murmured, reverent. They rushed forward, hands trembling as they touched cold iron. "This isn't magic. No, this surpasses any magic we know," Fred breathed, tracing a huge weld seam. "Alchemy and engineering pushed to their limits. It's a physical marvel." George switched on the structural mapping routine. Blue beams from his helmet swept the hull as he scanned. "The keel, the stress distribution. My stars, they've solved the stress concentration problem for superscale constructs, and these differential gears. This answers problems we've been stuck on for ages." The discovery swept the team into elation. This wasn't merely an ancient airship, it was a lost key to another civilization's technology. "Commander, we're rich!" Ron shouted. Sirius, equally excited, sent an emergency beacon to Jason on the main plane. After confirming there was no immediate danger, they entered the vessel. The bridge was vast and thick with dust. Instruments lay broken, but the central command seat remained. George brushed the dust from a crystal panel at the helm. The panel still held a flicker of stored energy. A faint projection glowed, displaying a short, desperate log in ancient human script. Log, Day 734. Swarm. They breached the final defenses. Queen, devouring everything. The entry cut off mid-sentence. Joy died in an instant, replaced by a chill that ran through them all. From the deeper shadows of the bridge came a faint click. Immediately afterward, the whole massive airship seemed to shudder, as if waking. 253, Crystal Erosion Insect Swarm. Ancient airship, bridge. The thrill of finding the captain's log evaporated the moment Sirius read the final, desperate entry. The bug-tide, the queen, is devouring everything. He tasted the words like iron. The sentence wrapped around his heart like a cold viper. He remembered the blurred murals at the city gate, ancient humans and goblins standing shoulder to shoulder against a wave-like enemy. It wasn't myth. It was bloody history. A faint click came from the shadows. "Who's there?" Ron snapped, raising his enchanted flintlock toward the sound. Fred and George stopped their inspection and dropped into a back-to-back stance. The air grew taut. The tremor came again, this time with a low, oppressive roar, as if the earth itself were grinding. "Is this an earthquake?" Ron asked, uncertain. As an earth mage, he felt the ground's pulse. George's face drained of color. He jabbed at a light screen he'd activated. Its readout displayed the vibration frequency around the airship. This frequency is too regular. It isn't natural crustal movement. It's like billions of things moving in the same rhythm, the same direction. Before he could finish, Sirius's emergency spatial beacon screamed. Red light bathed the bridge. Elder Rust Ironheart's hologram burst into life, mangled and terrified. Where the Goblin Elder had once radiated stern authority, his face now showed pure panic. His beard was singed, his ceremonial robe in tatters. Behind him, mining tunnels burned and bucked like a living thing. "Lord Black, help!" The Elder's voice warped into a keening cry. "Bugs, the legendary crystal erosion Zerg. They're pouring out from deep underground. Our mining area is being devoured." Ah, a goblin guard on the feed was impaled by a crystal spike from the dark. Strange crystal growths crawled over his body until he became a twisted statue. "Our seal, the place we broke through." Rust Ironheart sobbed, mucus and tears trailing down his face. His words came out in ragged bursts. That wasn't an entrance to the ruins. It was the prison that held these devils. He switched the feed to the goblin's largest external energy mining site. The image that poured across the bridge was apocalyptic. What should have been a monument to goblin industry had become a maw of destruction. Countless insects of every size rushed the defenses, their carapaces shimmering like black crystal with a sickly inner light. Smaller creatures spat corrosive acid that melted thick alloy into pools of molten metal. Claws harder than tempered steel shredded the rock golems the goblins relied on. Larger, rhino-sized behemoths, bodies as massive as a night bus, crashed into fortifications and pulverized them. Turret-like organisms rooted in the ground opened like flowers, revealing glowing crystal cores that fired high-energy spikes, each strike turning Earth into jagged craters. Sirius pupils pinched down. The mural images slotted into place. They hadn't stumbled onto the ruins by luck. By breaching that hangar door, they might have broken an ancient seal, and unleashed the very catastrophe that once nearly wiped a civilization away. "We let them out," Ron whispered, ashen. The camera pulled back. Beyond the overwhelmed perimeter, the insect tide was endless. Locust-like flyers screaming through the sky, dropping bone-like spines, heavily armored chargers battering the last defensive lines, swarms of scythe-clawed things pouring into breaches like black water. Goblin towers flickered as defensive runes overloaded and burst. Warriors fought with ferocious courage, but their blades only sparked uselessly off the crystal shells. "Hold the line for Rust Ironheart," a goblin commander roared, swinging a battle axe in a final defiant effort. A truck-sized ramming bug slammed through the last gate, and the camera feed dissolved in a blinding explosion. Static filled the screen. The signal cut off. Silence, heavy and tangible, settled over the bridge. The exhilaration of discovery was dead. In its place stood the cold, iron certainty of war. "Zero. Do you copy?" Sirius barked into his wrist beacon. His voice was hard as flint. "Connect to Jason, highest emergency channel. Tell him the situation's 10,000 times worse than we feared," he added. "We didn't come here to dig up history. We came here to fight a war." City of Dawn, Command Center. Jason had been discussing the new school year's curriculum with Dumbledore when Zero's synthesized voice cut through, stripped of its usual neutrality and crackling with alarm. "Warning, warning. Pathfinder Team 1 has encountered a highest-level crisis. The Goblin allied race, Rust Ironheart, is under devastating attack by an unknown hostile life form, the crystal erosion Zerg. The distress signal has been interrupted. Based on last transmitted telemetry, their defenses collapsed 30 seconds ago. Activate the highest war protocol. Commander, please issue your orders." The composure left Jason's face. He stared at the light screen where a dot representing Pathfinder Team 1 was being encircled by a swarm of hostile red marks. He closed his eyes for a breath, then opened them and said one word to the system. "Zero. The war has begun." 254. God's Decision, City of Dawn, Command Center. The shadow of war fell instantly over the floating City of Dawn, a place that had stood for new life and hope. The relaxed discussions about the new school year had vanished. In their place lay a suffocating gravity and a deathly silence. Jason, Dumbledore, and Snape, who had rushed here the moment the alarm came in, formed a triangle before the massive arcane sand table and stared at the horrific dynamic simulation it displayed. A blue point, marking the Goblin Allies' main mining area, was being devoured by an immense, rapidly expanding red mass. That red mass consisted of millions of tiny hostile points of light, like cancerous cells, greedily encroaching and assimilating everything. In one corner of the table, the 4 green points representing Pathfinder Team 1 were completely surrounded by the Red Sea, a lone boat in a storm that could be swallowed at any moment. "Reporting, Commander." Zero's emotionless synthetic voice cut through the silence. It had finished its preliminary analysis using Sirius's last transmitted image before the signal died and the environmental data salvaged from the ancient airship. Based on a comprehensive assessment of biological structure and energy signatures, the invading crystal erosion Zerg are preliminarily classified as a Level 3 civilization disaster. Its elite unit, the heavy armor ramming worm, has an average energy reaction intensity comparable to a fully grown Norwegian ridgeback dragon. Its ranged unit, the high-energy cannon worm, delivers a single attack sufficient to penetrate the frontal armor of our current Generation 3 combat puppets. Zero paused, then brought up an even grimmer model. Based on its rate of spread and total energy output, its population is preliminarily estimated to exceed 1 million. Conventional forces cannot effectively resist it. Conclusion: without the intervention of a decisive force, the entire Rust Ironheart Goblin clan will be annihilated within 3 hours. Each sentence struck like a hammer. Snape spoke in his usual cool, low voice, precise, surgical. "The goblins are our most important mineral suppliers, especially for the rare magic metals essential to the City of Dawn's core power systems. Only their mines can consistently produce those ores. They're also our allies in the Underdark. Their annihilation would cost us not only a strategic foothold, but several key alchemical production lines, likely sending them into long-term stagnation." There was no rhetoric in his words, only the stark necessity of the situation. This was not merely about rescuing allies, it was about defending the City of Dawn's lifeline. Jason, Dumbledore stepped forward. His blue eyes, restored to fierce vitality, blazed with an unprecedented hunger for battle. He was no longer the composed, kindly headmaster. He was a weapon tempered for war. "Let me go." His voice was clear and unwavering. "Now that I've advanced to Tier 2, I need a real fight to test and consolidate the arcane I control. Armchair planning won't forge true power." He turned toward the devouring red on the sand table, his gaze sharpened. "Besides, the goblin's desperate situation is an opportunity to demonstrate our new strength to all our allies and any potential foes, to make plain how foolish it would be to oppose the City of Dawn." There was authority behind the promise. In the past, to preserve the old world's order, he had negotiated and compromised within rigid rules. Having embraced the might of Arcane, he now intended to defend the order of the new world directly and decisively by cutting down the invaders. Jason looked at the resolute Dumbledore and then at the stern Snape. Hesitation would be a crime at such a moment. As supreme commander of the floating city, he acted with the cold decisiveness of a god. "Order!" His command pulsed through the command center and spread instantly across the city. "Floating City of Dawn, enter Level 2 war status immediately. All non-combatants to shelters. All defensive rune arrays engage at full strength. All combat units assemble and await orders at designated points." At his command, the city, like a vast war beast rousing from sleep, began to hum. Visible shields rose from the decks and plazas and wove together into a massive energy dome over the cloud sea. The red lights in the eyes of countless combat puppets flared, and they marched in tight formation to their defensive stations. Zero posted emergency tasks at the Wizard Mercenary Registry. Jason turned to Dumbledore. His tone was solemn as he gave the appointment. "Headmaster Albus Dumbledore, by my authority as Supreme Commander of the City of Dawn, I appoint you General Commander of the Underdark Rescue Operation. You will assume full responsibility for all battlefield matters." "Understood." Dumbledore inclined his head and accepted the weight of command. Jason then addressed Snape. "Professor Snape, you will lead the Venomfang Puppet Squadron as our flanking support. Your venomous arcane and alchemical expertise will be uniquely effective against a vast biological swarm." "Yes, Commander." A thin, cold arc touched Snape's lips. To apply his mastery of potions to create corrosive agents that melted flesh and stone, then amplify them 1,000-fold through arcane, nothing pleased him more. Within 10 minutes, an elite rescue force assembled. In the plane teleportation hall, 500 pitch-black Venomfang combat puppets stood in precise ranks. Their mechanical frames carried alchemical tanks filled with potent corrosives. Snape stood at the front in his black arcanist robe, an austere Dark Lord poised to unleash death. Beside him, Dumbledore had donned a new, custom-tailored silver-white arcanist robe. Intricate runes of protection and order had been embroidered in gold along its surface, glinting under the hall's light. He gripped a new wand carved from a branch of the City of Dawn's core life-ancient tree, and his presence radiated majesty and menace, the aura of a god made mortal. A true Tier 2 Archmage, a Tier 1 Arcanist who specialized in lethal toxins. 500 elite war machines, this was Jason's answer, the visible tip of the City of Dawn's might. "Open the teleportation gate. Target Earth Elemental Plane, Pathfinder Team 1's last transmitted coordinates." At Jason's order, the plane teleportation gate rippled open. Beyond the shimmering curtain lay no peaceful ruin, but an underground battlefield threaded with blood and fire, already on the brink of collapse. Dumbledore said nothing further. Wand in hand, he stepped first into the spatial corridor of slaughter. Like a shaft of holy light cast into darkness, his figure vanished. 255, arcane power, disintegrating light, rust iron city, outer defense line. This was the goblins' last stronghold, their tribe's final hope. Now this underground city, built with wisdom and sweat, faced an unprecedented crisis. On the walls, Elder Rust Ironheart and the 100 or so goblin warriors still able to stand made a desperate last stand. Their armor was cracked, the runes on their staves glowed weakly, and exhaustion and numbness were written on every face. Beneath them, an endless tide of crystal erosion zerg, black as a deluge, pounded the walls in wave after wave. Corrosive acid ate away great gaps in the stone, and countless sickle-clawed zerg swarmed up through the breaches, engaging the goblins in bloody close-quarters fighting. Farther off, a colossal elite zerg beast, as large as a small mountain, lumbered toward the city gate. Each step shook the ground. Its massive body, formed of black crystal, bristled with hideous bone spurs. 6 great segmented limbs, like battering rams, crushed everything beneath them. It's a behemoth, a young goblin warrior cried, his voice ripped by terror. The mobile natural disaster that destroys cities. All turrets, focus fire on the behemoth. Elder Rust Ironheart roared, his voice raw. The few remaining alchemical turrets along the wall turned and poured their last reserves of power into the behemoth. Their energy shots, capable of shattering mountains, only shimmered against the beast's strangely glowing crystal carapace, then skidded off and exploded into meaningless sparks amid the zerg tide. The behemoth seemed enraged. It paused, threw its head back, and issued a deafening roar that became a visible shockwave, instantly shattering the defensive runes along the wall. It lowered its head, its 6 massive limbs tense like a fully charged battering ram, preparing a catastrophic charge that would break the city's last barrier. Despair, as dark as the underground itself, closed over every goblin heart. As they braced to meet death, a massive silver-blue teleportation gate opened without warning in the plaza behind them. Its light was sacred and warm, cutting through the battlefield gloom and drawing every goblin's eyes. What stepped through was a sight none would forget. A figure in a silver-white arcanist robe walked out first, holding the staff of the ancient tree of life. Behind him came the stern-faced Snape and the survivors of the Sirius expedition team, their eyes burning with the fire of revenge. Behind them marched 500 black combat automatons in perfect formation, exuding a cold, killing intent. Divine soldiers descending from the sky. "Get out of the way!" Elder Rust Ironheart cried first, glancing at the behemoth poised to charge. Its crystallized shell reflects all magic. Dumbledore didn't even look at him. The newly promoted second-tier arcanist faced the doomsday beast with an expression that did not stir. He raised his hand slowly and, as if stating an objective fact, spoke a single word: disintegrate. An invisible wave of arcane law, like the force of a higher dimension, washed over the charging monster. Time seemed to stop. The enormous, overwhelmingly powerful behemoth faltered mid-charge. Then, to the stupefied shock of goblins, Snape, Sirius, Ron, and the others, what followed overturned every notion they had of powerful. The behemoth's supposedly indestructible crystallized carapace, its muscle that crushed steel, its bones harder than rock, began to decompose and collapse from the molecular level. Like a sandcastle in a wind, its form dissolved. While still frozen in its charging posture, the beast rapidly dissipated into the most primitive cosmic dust, scattered by the underground wind. It was reduced to nothing in an instant. One moment it had been an invincible doomsday creature, the next, not a single intact cell remained. Shock, absolute and unparalleled, fell over the battlefield. Whether relentlessly attacking crystal erosion zerg or the goblins holding the walls, all stood rooted, unable to comprehend the sight of such divine retribution. Is this the power of a second tier? Snape stared at the empty ground, horror cracking the usual coldness from his face. Sirius and Ron stood with their mouths open, speechless. They had known Dumbledore was strong, but not godlike. With that single understated command, Dumbledore stamped his absolute authority as the guardian of a new era and set the decisive tone for the war. He turned slowly to the arcane army behind him, which was already at full readiness, and raised his staff. "All forces attack. Clear them out." On his order, the eyes of the 500 Fang automatons flared crimson. Like a black tide, they surged forward to cut down the still-stunned crystal erosion zerg. A one-sided slaughter, led by arcanists, had begun. The silence that followed Dumbledore's strike, an impact that felt like divine judgment, lasted less than 3 seconds. Almost at once, driven by some deeper will, the endless tide of crystal erosion zerg surged forward again as if nothing had happened. They ignored the evaporated bodies of their companions and flowed toward the city walls like a black flood. But the defenders they met this time were not flesh and blood goblins. They met an iron wall of arcane and steel. "All units, attack!" At Dumbledore's command, 500 pitch-black, venom-fanged golems moved with machine precision. Under tactical directives from Zero over the data link, they snapped into a standard three-rank formation. Front row kneeling on one knee, the two ranks behind staggered, raising their arcane rifles in perfect unison. Muzzles glowed a faint blue. Fire! There was no thunderous report of powder firearms, only the hair-raising hum of compressed energy tearing through the air. Hundreds of bolts spat out and wove together, creating an impenetrable filament of raw energy that cut into the Zerg tide. The sickle-clawed Zerg at the front never even screamed. Their proud crystallized carapaces, which had once deflected spells, shattered under those rays. Energy penetrated and vaporized them, leaving blackened cavities instead of wounds. Row after row of Zerg collapsed. Still more surged forward, but the golem line held like an unbreakable wall, stopping the tide 100 meters from the city. The goblins on the ramparts stared, dumbstruck. They had always believed war meant sacrifice, blood and agony. What they watched was surgical, efficient, almost clinical. There were no ragged screams or flying flesh, only methodical slaughter, timed down to the millisecond. If the golems were the steady bass drum in this war symphony, then Professor Snape was the lead violinist, threading a brilliant, deadly cadenza. Snape did not cast flamboyant, showy spells. As a first-order arcanist, specializing in the meditation of the breath of spiritual poison, he chose the most efficient, most lethal methods. Domain expansion, corrosive poison cloud. He flicked his wand and dark green runes erupted across the ground at his feet. From them crawled great ribbons of viscous, living-looking mist that spread toward the battlefield. The Zerg's crystalline shells hissed and spat when they met that poison. The carapaces softened and dissolved visibly, their defenses reduced to brittle glass. Snape's lips curved with cold satisfaction as he tapped his wand again, sending invisible, arcane needles into the bodies of heavily armored Zerg. Neural paralysis toxin. The hulking Zerg that had been charging with reckless force suddenly grew sluggish and clumsy, like drunkards. They lost coordination and became perfect live targets for the Golem Legion. At the flank, another figure cut through the melee like a red-hot blade. "Follow me. Target those turret things." Sirius Black, the marauder-blooded arcanist, led a hunting pack of 10 high-speed mobile golems. Skirting the frontal slaughter, they moved with the economy of a predator, fast, precise, and brutal, zeroing in on the turret Zerg that fired long, crystalline spikes. Each strike eliminated a major threat to the main force. Behind the walls, Ron concentrated on earth magic. He stood among the surviving goblin shamans, not slaying directly but reshaping the battlefield. Earth, heed me. Quicksand trap. Rocks, be my prison. Stone cage, tear apart, fissure. Under his commands, the terrain itself betrayed the Zerg. Patches of ground turned to sucking quicksand, swallowing swarms. Slabs of stone rose and locked into cages that split the tide. Bottomless fissures yawned open and broke the rhythm of the assault. The battlefield became choreography, Dumbledore directing from the center beneath a solid golden barrier that sealed the command hub into an absolute sanctuary, Snape weakening and controlling massed units, Sirius carrying out surgical eliminations, Ron fracturing and channeling movement, and the Golem Legion providing the unshakable front. The goblins, who had clung to the old idea that victory came at the cost of lives, were profoundly unsettled. This was not heroism. It was an arcane civilization's dimensionality-reduced strike against brute force. It looked nothing like their previous tragic resistance, where bodies were the price for buying time. The Zerg tide, contained and then steadily pushed back, retreated step by step from the gate of the city of Rust Iron toward the bottomless abyss from which it had poured. In the command center of the City of Dawn, Jason watched the live feeds Zero shared. On the screens, the front line was collapsing in orderly, efficient waves. Victory felt close, but Jason's brow tightened. "Zero," he said, pointing at the portions of the Zerg still charging like moths to a flame. "Analyze their behavior patterns." "Analyzing, Commander. Abnormal phenomenon detected," Zero replied. Despite heavy casualties at the front, Zerg in the rear show no signs of fear or retreat. Their attack rhythms are rigid, indicating forced control by a higher will. Their behavior does not conform to the survival instincts of any known organism. Jason's expression hardened. The battle was no longer simply about beating the Zerg back. Without finding and destroying the hidden queen, the will directing these creatures, the slaughter would only ever be temporary. This fight could be won tactically. Ending the war required something far more decisive. 257. Queen's Beacon City of Dawn, Arcane Sand Table. The red dots representing the crystal erosion zerg were being swallowed by the blue torrent of the Arcane Legion. The battle looked unequivocal. Any commander seeing this would be uncorking a bottle of good wine to celebrate. But Commander-in-Chief Jason stared at the steadily shrinking red areas with a tightening frown. His gaze slid past the locked front to the abyss behind the Zerg swarm, still pitch black and continuously spitting out red dots. Something was wrong. This war was too strange. War, at its core, was an exchange. Accept losses to gain strategic advantage. These crystal erosion Zerg, however, showed no sense of trade-offs. They were mere consumables, throwing themselves into the Puppet Legion's steel meat grinder with almost idiotic abandon. They didn't fear death, or more precisely, they seemed not to understand what death was. That pointed to only one conclusion: zero. Jason's voice in the empty command center was cold. Yes, Commander. Allocate 30% of the floating city's main brain computing power to connect with every independent processing unit of the frontline combat puppets, Jason ordered. Abandon optimization of individual combat. Analyze the macro command structure of the entire Zerg cluster. He drew a heavy circle over the surging Red Sea on the sand table. This attack pattern, disregarding any casualties, lacking even basic evasive tactics, doesn't fit the survival logic of any independent biological population. Understood, Commander. Building data model, behavior logic analysis module, initiating. Zero executed the command. The floating city's immense computing power, the kind that could deduce stellar trajectories, came online. Tens of thousands of combat units and the mountains of data generated by their engagements over the past half hour poured into Zero's core database. Every Zerg's movement, every attack choice, every twitch before death was converted into raw data, cross-compared and analyzed. A new dynamic model emerged. Reporting, Commander. Analysis complete, Zero intoned in its cold mechanical tone. Conclusion 1. The crystal erosion Zerg possess no individual will. Their actions are centered entirely on several fixed tactical nodes. Once a node is destroyed by our superior firepower, all Zerg in that area immediately abandon their current target and rigidly turn toward the next closest tactical node, with no flexibility or hesitation. Conclusion 2. This uniformly inflexible behavior is characteristic of a hive-like collective mind, what you call swarm intelligence. Inference. Behind the crystal erosion Zerg, there exists a single supreme authority, a main brain or queen, directly controlling every combat unit via an ultra-long-range communication channel. Take out the leader first, Jason murmured. That was how war should be fought. Waging an attrition battle against endless worker and soldier swarms was the height of folly. Find the queen and strike, cut the war off at the root. But where was that queen hiding? An encrypted comm cut in. Fred and George Weasley flooded the screen, faces flushed with excitement. Behind them, the lab looked as if a bomb had gone off, bubbling glass and sparking runes everywhere. Commander, major discovery, Fred shouted. Speak, Jason said. We took fresh ganglion samples from Zerg corpses, George reported, holding a small black tissue that twitched faintly with his tweezers. There's a weak but constant psionic fluctuation. Fred waved the tweezers like a flag. It doesn't match any magic or energy signature we know. It's more like a mental broadcast, covering the entire battlefield and beyond. We think the Zerg Queen uses it to unify the thoughts and actions of all Zerg. Jason's pupils narrowed. There it was, the invisible thread binding every pawn to its player. He gave an order that bordered on insane with its speed. Excellent. Fred, George, interface your lab with Zero's data. Use Zero's rune algorithm as the core and your alchemy as the framework. Build me a psionic signal amplification and tracking array. Pull that weak signal out of the battlefield noise, then locate its emitter. Yes, Commander. The twins were stunned for a beat, then their faces lit with fierce enthusiasm. Combining arcane runes, alchemy, and unknown psionic tech into a practical device was a challenge tailor-made for them. In the rear mobile lab, a race against time began. With Zero's support, hundreds of millions of rune permutations were rapidly deduced, filtered, and optimized. The Weasleys turned ideas into hardware, high-purity memory crystals as receivers, mithril threads wound into amplification coils, obsidian soaked in dragon blood as energy stabilizers. 20 minutes later, they had cobbled together a curious temporary tracking device, part steampunk, part arcane. Reporting, Commander. Queen Beacon tracking array complete. Final calibration with 0 finished. Ready to activate. Activate. Jason's order was curt. The twins pressed the red button. The device hummed. An invisible fluctuation rolled out and washed over the arcane sand table. Under everyone's gaze, a clear image formed. Within the red sea that represented billions of Zerg, countless finer threads of faint red energy extended from each Zerg and converged in the same direction. The threads joined into a single, thick, straight red line that sliced across the sand table, ignoring terrain and obstructions, plunging into the deepest, darkest, unmapped underground. At the end of the line, 0 marked out a huge, blindingly reactive red dot. Its mechanical voice filled the command center. Target locked. Name, Zerg Main Hive. Highest energy reaction individual confirmed. Codename Queen. The script of the war had been torn up and rewritten. The campaign shifted from a war of total annihilation to a high-precision decapitation operation. Jason straightened slowly as he stared at the locked red dot. 0, he ordered. Inform Commander Dumbledore that the front will remain suppressed by the Puppet Legion. Begin assembling the assault team. We have only one objective. 258. Nest Dive City of Rust Iron, frontline battlefield. Under the Arcane Legion's relentless barrage, the so-called war had become a one-sided slaughter. The tide of insects was being shredded. Their defensive lines were pushed back inch by inch, and the outcome was no longer in doubt. Dumbledore handed temporary command of the front line to the Goblin Elder, just recovered from shock and now filled with fanatic zeal, and to the puppet army remotely controlled by 0. With that settled, he turned to Snape and Sirius. Jason gave us the Queen's coordinates, he said in a low voice. The rest of the way, we have to walk ourselves. I've been waiting for this, Sirius said, cracking his knuckles. His eyes glittered with excitement. I'm going to drag that damned Queen out of her rat hole myself. Snape said nothing. He produced a small potion bottle from his pocket. The liquid inside glowed an unsettling purple. He took a tiny sip, a sickly flush crossing his face as his lips twitched. Without another word, the three fell into formation and plunged into the tunnel that led deep underground, a pitch-black passage guided by the Queen's beacon. The tunnel was not natural. Its inner walls were so slick they might have been mirrors, yet they had a sticky, almost fleshy feel. The floor wasn't stone either. It depressed softly underfoot with a faint squelching noise, as if they were treading across the living flesh of some giant creature. The deeper they went, the more alive everything felt. Clusters of swollen purple crystals, like tumors, sprouted from the rock, pulsing with an eerie glow. Between them, dark red veins snaked across the surface, throbbing in time. The air stank, a cloying sweetness overlaid with decay that made the throat turn. This is absolutely disgusting, Sirius muttered, pinching his nose. Like dumping a barrel of honey into a troll's latrine. Analyze the air composition, Dumbledore ordered. Snape's voice was as cold as ever. High concentrations of hallucinogenic spores, harmless to arcanists but capable of paralyzing ordinary nervous systems. A natural slaughterhouse. He had barely finished when Dumbledore froze. They're here. No sooner had the words left his mouth than motionless shadows along the tunnel walls snapped to life. Dozens of pitch-black shapes detached from stone and leapt at them. Shadow assassin bugs. They moved at impossible speed, leaving only after-images, their forelimbs elongated into razor-edged bone blades that sliced through the air with a metallic hiss. These specialized assassins could partially merge with the shadow plane, were immune to mundane attacks, and could teleport short distances. Any ordinary unit would have been wiped out instantly. The three of them showed no surprise, if anything looked mildly bored. More of these little brats hiding in the dark, Sirius yawned, flicking a finger toward the advancing swarm. Thunderlight domain. Lightning cracked, bright as daylight, exploding outward from him. Silver arcs braided together like a massive net and filled the tunnel, erasing every shadow. The shadow assassin bugs were forced to fully materialize and recoiled with tortured hisses as the light tormented them. At the instant they solidified, Snape moved, So casually it seemed he barely bothered. He snapped his fingers. Toxic spores. Soft as a whisper, countless invisible spores puffed out, each loaded with a potent neurotoxin. The newly materialized assassins froze mid-pounce, as if someone had pressed pause on them. The whole sequence was so swift it felt rehearsed. Order is the foundation of everything, Dumbledore intoned. He lifted his wand and spoke a single commanding word. Here, shadows are forbidden. It was a power only a second-order arcanist could wield, a law-tinged edict that altered local physical rules. An invisible wave of order swept the tunnel. The concept of shadow was temporarily erased. The paralyzed assassin bugs were wrenchingly dragged out of the shadow plane by an unseen hand. Their translucent forms hardened and their screams grew higher with the shock of being forced into tangibility. Much better, Sirius said, satisfied, and idly gestured. Dozens of lightning chains leapt from his hand to the immobilized bugs. A scent of burning filled the air. Where the bugs had been were now only small piles of black ash. From first threat to final cinder, it took no more than 5 seconds. The three hadn't even shifted their stance. Snape crouched, plucked a speck of ash with alchemical tweezers, and examined it. Their energy cores simulate the fluctuation frequency of shadow elements, he observed. Unfortunately, their nervous systems are too fragile to withstand basic alkaloid toxins. Severus, Dumbledore said with a faint smile, don't always think about using specimens for potions. Proceed, Snape murmured, and they went on. More surprises awaited. Rounding a corner, dozens of tumor-like sacs ruptured simultaneously. A green, viscous liquid, the color of rusted copper, spilled out like a waterfall. The fluid hissed against the rock, highly corrosive acid that could eat through steel. Explosive bugs? How unoriginal, Sirius complained, too lazy to raise a hand. Dumbledore simply tapped his wand once. Protective barrier. A golden translucent shield shimmered into being around them. The acid struck the barrier and slid away harmlessly. They walked through the rain of corrosive liquid into a cavern hung with stalactites. The psionic signals here were noisy, scattered. Careful, something's concealed, Snape warned, his nose twitching. Thousands of ordinary-looking stalactites along the ceiling suddenly opened wide, revealing rows of teeth. They lunged down like snarling maws, ambush bugs. This time Snape moved first. A flash of impatience crossed his face as black arcane energy pooled in his palm. Mass weakness curse. An invisible wave washed the cavern. The falling ambush bugs went limp mid-descent. Their bones dissolved, and they slumped into gooey splats on the floor. Every ambush collapsed under the weight of the curse, neutralized without fuss. The three walked on, deliberate and unhurried, like men strolling through a familiar garden rather than venturing into a predator-filled lair. After the trap-infested stretch, the cavern opened wide. They stood at the rim of an enormous subterranean chamber. At its center floated a gigantic, pulsating biological cocoon, translucent and throbbing with an eerie purple light. The Queen's psionic signature, what they'd been following all the way, surged from behind that cocoon like a storm. The Queen was there. Facing the enormous, glowing biological membrane that pulsed like a living thing, Dumbledore did not hesitate. He thrust the Elder Wand forward. A concentrated, silvery light flared at its tip. Disarming charm. A crescent-shaped blade of silver light, its edges seeming to erase whatever they touched, shot forth and rent a massive fissure in the tough membrane, large enough for 3 people to pass through. The severed edges dissolved into fundamental particles and dispersed into the air. The 3 men stepped through, and the sight that met them silenced even the widely seasoned Dumbledore for a moment. This was the Broodmother's main nest, a colossal cavern, unimaginably vast, as if it had hollowed out the very core of the earth. The dome rose so high it seemed to vanish, studded with clusters of enormous crystals that bathed the chamber in a deep violet glow, like an inverted starry sky. At the cavern's center floated a heart, a leviathan the size of a small mountain range, formed of countless tightly woven, shimmering crystal clusters. It pulsed with a slow, powerful rhythm. Thump, thump. Each beat made the entire space resonate with a deep, soul-shaking thud. From the crystal heart extended countless conduits, thick as flood pipes, that braided outward to the cavern's 4 walls and plunged deep into the rock, as if drawing something up. This was the source of the insect tide. The so-called queen was not a separate creature. Her upper body rose smoothly from the top of that gigantic crystal heart, fused to it as one. She had nearly perfect feminine proportions. Her skin was the finest polished purple crystal, smooth and cold. Long hair, made of even finer crystal filaments, floated around her as if in a breeze. She looked like an exquisite, chilled sculpture, alive, symbiotic with the entire nest. Merlin's beard, Sirius swallowed, staring at the magnificent twisted sight. Did we just break into a titan's chest cavity? Snape's expression grew graver. He could feel the concentration of free-floating energy in the air, astonishingly high. Every inch of space was saturated with the purest, most primitive magic, yet that magic carried an unsettling taint of assimilation. At the City of Dawn's command center, the scene from Dumbledore's perspective flashed across Jason's light screen via Arcane link. Jason's pupils snapped narrow. "Zero," he barked. "Analyze the energy composition and operating mode of that core immediately. Highest priority." "Yes, Commander." Zero pushed its computing power to the limit, and a torrent of data began to flow. In less than 3 seconds, the analysis returned, but the AI's voice carried an unprecedented urgency. "Warning, high-intensity planar energy siphon detected." "Commander, the crystal heart is not a biological organ. It is a supergiant planar energy converter. Those conduits operate like straws, drawing the primordial magic of this Earth elemental plane and converting it into the high-dimensional biological energy the insect race needs for reproduction and evolution." On the light screen, a macroscopic energy flow model unfolded. Under Zero's simulation, the Earth elemental plane looked like an apple being continuously drained of its juices, shriveling away. "Performing simulation. Simulation complete." Zero's tone went cold and merciless. "Warning, this entity is performing irreversible structural ecological modification of the current plane. At the present siphon efficiency, the core energy of the Earth elemental plane will be exhausted within 72 hours. The plane will begin to collapse from energy depletion. When that happens, unstable spatial laws will produce countless random spatial rifts, scattering all the insect hordes from this nest like dandelion seeds across every plane that maintains an energy link with it." Zero paused, then stamped a line of text in the most conspicuous red on the screen, including our main world. A dead silence fell over the command center. Jason's face went ashen. What had been an allied request for aid was now a catastrophe-level emergency. There was no turning back. At that same instant, in the broodmother's main nest, a thought devoid of emotion, pure information, echoed simultaneously in the minds of Dumbledore, Snape, and Sirius. Analyzing, invader species, unknown humanoid life form. Identifying, energy level, high tier, threat assessment, extremely high. You should not have awakened us. The living sculpture, the queen, fused to the crystal heart, had been keeping her eyes closed. Slowly she opened them. They were enormous, magnificent compound eyes made of countless hexagonal facets, perfectly cold. Her gaze snapped to the 3 tiny figures standing at the cavern's entrance. A chill ran to the core of each of them. Awakened, Sirius paled, instantly realizing the seal they had broken in that ancient ruin had led to this. The queen made no move to give them time to think. As her attention stirred, the entire nest came alive. Thump, 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 thump! The crystal heart's pulse accelerated like war drums. Along the 4 cavern walls, countless closed brood sacs exploded open. Terrifying, far more powerful guardian-class insect beasts, grotesquer and deadlier than any of the specialized species they had encountered, bellowed and surged forth. The decisive battle was about to erupt. 260, the Queen's guards and unexpected aid. Clear, the intruders. The Queen's emotionless will, like a final judgment, rolled through the main nest. Boom. The crystal cluster heart suspended in the cavern's center trembled, erupting in a dazzling blood-red glow. The light was viscous and almost solid, racing back along countless energy conduits set into the cavern walls. The entire main nest hummed and shook under the furious surge. Sirius whistled. The cynical curl that usually marked his face fell away, replaced by the focused excitement of a hunter locking onto prey. "It seems Her Majesty is getting serious." Snape didn't answer. He expanded his venom breath domain, a thin, almost invisible layer of dark green energy clinging to him like a second skin, ready to counter any attack. They stood poised for battle, when 6 massive incubation sacs on the surface of the pulsating crystal cluster heart split open with ugly, jagged tears. Accompanied by grinding, tearing sounds, 6 creatures crawled free. Nearly 3 meters tall, their bodies sheathed in exaggerated purple crystal armor, each wielding a gigantically honed energy scythe forged from the same crystal, Royal Guard worms. They had no eyes, smooth crystallized helmets capped their heads instead. Still, all 3 felt 6 cold, dead, emotionless waves of killing intent press out from beneath those helmets and lock onto them. The energy fluctuations pouring from the guards were terrifyingly high, approaching the level of a quasi-first-rank arcanist. "Severus, the 2 on the left are yours," Sirius called, charging forward with battle intent. "The 2 on the right are mine," he added, then laughed breathlessly. "Humph," Snape snorted. Black arcane energy twined from his fingertips, forming several swift, venomous snake forms that coiled toward his targets. In a blink, the fight erupted. Snape and Sirius each engaged 2 royal guards. The remaining 2, plus the Queen's tsunami-like, ever-intensifying psychic pressure, bore down on Dumbledore, who stood at the forefront. Arcane light and the glitter of crystal scythes filled the nest. Sirius fought broad and brutal, violent lightning and flame spat from his wand, smashing against the massive scythes of the power-type guards. Each impact threw visible shockwaves through the air. Snape was more surgical and lethal. He flickered through poisonous mist, launching corrosive curses and toxins that eroded defenses and slowed movements, always probing for a fatal opening. But these royal guards were unlike any worms they'd faced before. Strong, precise, perfectly coordinated, they seemed indifferent to Snape's toxins, potent enough to make dragons howl, and driven solely by the Queen's command to purify. Even gifted fighters like Snape and Sirius only managed a fragile stalemate in their 2-on-1 duels. Dumbledore felt the heaviest pressure. He had to parry a pincer attack from 2 guards while devoting most of his attention to resisting the Queen's relentless mental assault, a force strong enough to crush a soul. The battle was sliding toward an exhausting, uncertain struggle. Then, rumble, 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 a massive rhythmic roar rolled up from the depths of the earth. The sound seemed to come from the planet's core. Instantly, the main nest shook violently. This quake wasn't caused by their combat. It came from farther off, heavier, unstoppable. Above the dome, great crystal clusters shuddered and shattered, raining fragments down. "What's going on?" Sirius shouted as he drove a burst fireball to push a guard back for a breather. "An earthquake?" No. For the first time, genuine surprise flickered across Dumbledore's azure eyes. He looked toward a section of the cavern wall. "This energy, it's—" Before he could finish, a thunderous crash split the air. The thick rock face he'd been studying exploded under some ancient, colossal force, spiderweb cracks racing across it. Then, against all expectation, and even the Queen's disdainful gaze, the wall was smashed inward from the outside. Tons of rock and dirt cascaded down as something huge forced its way through. A massive, ancient goblin-style metal construct squeezed into the cavern, the lost ancient goblin airship. Once a lifeless husk, it now thudded and groaned with revived power. Its long-dormant boilers and complex pipelines glowed with a deep, earthy yellow light. Scorching energy pulsed through them. Dozens of colossal magi energy cannons covered in mottled rust slid from hidden ports, their runes crawling with light. At each muzzle, an earthy yellow aura of condensing power gathered. On the bridge, before a control panel alive with countless runes, stood the small earth elemental Pan-Shi, the little mascot always dismissed as one that only ate and slept. Its tiny body radiated that same earthy yellow light, brilliant as the sun. It had achieved a deep resonance with the airship's core energy source. The vessel itself seemed to be powered by Pan-Shi. "Warning! Unknown high-dimensional earth elemental lifeform detected," a voice crackled from the City of Dawn. "Performing database comparison. Comparison successful." Zero's voice followed. "Commander, Pan-Shi is not an ordinary earth elemental. It is an extremely rare spirit of the earth vein core, a fragmented incarnation of this plane's primordial will. It sensed the Plane Mother's wail, and in the most primitive act of protection, activated and seized control of the only ancient war machine on this land capable of bearing its power." Pan-Shi emitted a sound unlike any living creature's, an energy resonance that felt like the earth itself roaring. The cry shook the airship and the cavern. With that roar, the dozens of Magi energy cannons finally locked on, unleashed their first volley in a millennium. Dozens of thick, earthy yellow beams, each capable of vaporizing a hill, ripped through the air, carrying the wrath of the plane itself, and slammed into the 6 arrogant royal guards.